The road stretched endlessly under the gray afternoon sky, a lifeless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the vast wilderness. Snowflakes drifted lazily, melting as they touched the pavement. Inside his old pickup truck, Ethan Carter tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, his mind lost in thought. The journey home had been uneventful, a monotonous drive through silent, snow-covered forests with nothing but the rhythmic crunch of tires against the road. But then, a sudden blur in his peripheral vision. His heart lurched as he slammed the brakes. The truck skidded slightly, the tires groaning against the icy road. For a moment, everything was still. Then, emerging from the thick tree line on the roadside, a massive wolf stepped onto the road. But it wasn't just any wolf. It was a mother wolf, thin, trembling, her fur dusted with frost, blocking the road, as if demanding he stop. Her breath curled into the air in heavy, desperate puffs. But what made Ethan's stomach tighten was what she did next. She lowered her body to the ground, front paws stretched forward, her golden eyes locked onto his with an intensity that sent a shiver up his spine. She wasn't growling. She wasn't snarling. She was begging. Ethan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. What the hell? Wolves didn't do this. They were wild, untamed creatures. They avoided humans at all costs. Yet this one had deliberately stepped onto the road, blocking. His truck, pleading, and then, as if sensing his hesitation, she turned her head sharply toward the trees. A whimper escaped her throat. Ethan followed her gaze, and that's when he saw them. 3 tiny figures huddled in the snow, barely visible against the white landscape. His pulse pounded. Wolf pups. They were weak, barely moving, their small bodies, half buried in the snowdrift. One of them let out a faint, pitiful cry, its voice nearly lost in the howling wind. The mother wolf turned back to him, her eyes shining with an urgency that made Ethan's chest tighten. She wasn't blocking the road to stop him. She was asking for help. But how? Why? Wolves feared humans. They stayed away, surviving in their own world, following their own rules. For a mother wolf to risk approaching a human, let alone beg for assistance, something had to be terribly wrong. Ethan swallowed hard. His instincts screamed at him to stay in the truck, to drive away. This isn't your problem. But another sound made him freeze. A low, guttural growl. Not from the mother wolf. From the darkness beyond the trees. Something else was out there. The mother wolf's ears flattened, her body tensed. She turned her head sharply toward the forest again, her lips curling into a silent snarl. Ethan narrowed his eyes, scanning the thick underbrush. The shadows between the trees seemed to shift, the wind carrying with it a scent, musky, sharp, predatory. His gut twisted. Something wasn't right. Why was this wolf so desperate? What had driven her to block a human's path? And more importantly, what was lurking in the woods, waiting for her to fail? Ethan Carter's hands tightened around the steering wheel as his heart hammered against his ribs. The mother wolf hadn't moved. She still crouched low, her piercing eyes locked onto his, her breath heavy with exhaustion and fear. She was waiting. Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. He wasn't the type to stop. He wasn't a rescuer, a hero, or one of those people who saw an injured animal and immediately took them in. That wasn't who he was anymore. Not since everything fell apart. The past year had turned him into a ghost of the man he used to be, living in isolation in his rundown cabin deep in the Montana wilderness, far away from the life he had built and lost. He had been a wildlife conservation officer once, a man who spent his life protecting nature, ensuring the survival of creatures like this wolf. But that part of him had died the day he made one mistake, one choice that cost someone everything. Now, he lived alone. No more risks, no more getting involved. Yet, here he was, staring at a mother wolf blocking his path, begging for something he wasn't sure he could give. He could just drive away, pretend he never saw them. After all, nature had its own rules. Wolves weren't pets. If these pups were sick, if they were starving, they wouldn't survive long. But then the smallest pup let out a sharp cry, a sound so weak and fragile it cut through him like a blade. Ethan cursed under his breath. Damn it. His fingers hovered over the gear shift. He should go. He really should. But then, as if sensing his hesitation, the mother wolf took a single step closer. She didn't growl. She didn't bare her teeth. She just looked at him. And in that moment, Ethan saw it. The raw, unfiltered desperation in her eyes. This wasn't just instinct. This was a mother trying to save her children. I know that feeling. With a reluctant sigh, Ethan threw the truck into park and reached for his gloves. He was going to regret this. Ethan stepped out of the truck into the bitter cold, the wind cutting through his jacket. He moved slowly, making sure not to appear threatening. The mother wolf watched his every move, her muscles tensed, ready to react. "Easy, girl," Ethan murmured, keeping his voice low. "I'm not here to hurt you." She didn't flinch, but her ears flicked at the sound of his voice. She was listening. Ethan took another step forward, his boots crunching against the icy ground. The moment he got close enough, he could see it clearly. The exhaustion in her body, the way her ribs pressed against her skin. She was starving, and her pups, they were barely holding on. One of them, the smallest, had stopped moving entirely. Ethan clenched his jaw. He crouched down, still keeping a careful distance, and extended his hand slightly. "You wouldn't be asking for help if you had another choice, huh?" The mother wolf let out a low whine, looking back at her pups, then at him. Ethan felt something inside him shift. "She's trusting me." Carefully, he took another step closer, until he was standing just a few feet away, and then the mother wolf did something he never expected. She lowered her head and stepped aside, giving him a clear path to her pups. Ethan's breath hitched. She was letting him help. But why? And more importantly, what had driven her to trust a human when wolves feared them more than anything? Whatever the answer was, Ethan knew one thing for sure. Something was out there, and it was still watching. Ethan Carter had seen a lot of things in the wild, but nothing like this. A lone mother wolf, starving and desperate, blocking a human's path. 3 tiny wolf pups, barely breathing, lying in the snow like discarded shadows. And now, the eerie silence of the woods, thick with something he couldn't name. He could feel it. Something wasn't right. Ethan knelt slowly, careful not to startle the mother wolf. Up close, she looked worse than he thought. Her once thick coat was patchy, ribs pressing through her skin, her eyes clouded with exhaustion. She had fought hard to keep these pups alive, but she was running out of time. He shouldn't be here. He shouldn't be thinking about saving them, because once you got involved, there was no turning back. That's what got him in trouble before. Linji. Last time Ethan had let himself care, it had cost him everything. A young bear cub, a failed rescue attempt, a family's grief. He had sworn to never make that mistake again. But as he looked at the smallest pup, lying completely still, he felt something tighten in his chest. He knew what giving up looked like. And that pup? It was giving up. Ethan cursed under his breath. His hands clenched into fists, torn between the logic screaming at him to walk away and the voice in his head whispering, "You know you can't." The ticking clock. Life or death. He exhaled sharply and reached for the nearest pup, the smallest one. The moment his fingers brushed against its fur, the mother wolf let out a sharp warning growl. Ethan froze. His heart pounded. She wasn't attacking. She was testing him. His hand remained still, his breath slow. "I'm not taking them," he murmured. "I just want to help." the mother wolf's ears, flicked, and then the smallest pup shivered. Ethan sucked in a breath. It was still alive. But not for long. He had to act now. If he walked away, this pup wouldn't last the night. Hell, none of them might. The mother wolf whined softly, glancing at Ethan, then back at the trees. She was afraid. Not of him. Of something else. Ethan swallowed hard, his instincts screaming at him to turn around and get out of there. Why is she so afraid? His eyes darted to the dark tree line beyond the clearing. There was no movement, no sound, but he could feel it. Something was out there, and whatever it wasn't friendly. The choice, risk or regret. Ethan's muscles tensed. This was it, the moment. If he helped them, he was dragging himself into something dangerous. But if he walked away, he already knew how that story ended. Slowly, cautiously, he scooped the smallest pup into his arms. It was ice cold, its body limp, far gone. Ethan placed a gloved hand against its tiny chest and waited. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then, a faint heartbeat. Barely there, but there. Ethan let out a shaky breath. He turned his gaze to the mother wolf. "I can try to save them," he said quietly, "but you have to trust me." For a long moment, she didn't move. The wind howled through the trees. The weight of the forest pressed in around them. And then, she stepped back, a silent agreement. Ethan tightened his grip on the tiny wolf and reached for the others. He was taking them with him. But as he turned toward his truck, a low, guttural snarl shattered the silence. Not from the mother wolf, from the trees behind them. Ethan froze. The mother wolf whirled around, her hackles raised, her body tense, and then Ethan saw it. A pair of glowing yellow eyes, watching from the darkness. His stomach twisted. They weren't alone. Something had been watching them the whole time. And now it was making its move. The eyes in the darkness. Ethan stood frozen, his breath shallow, his pulse thundering in his ears. The glowing yellow eyes in the darkness did not blink. They hovered in the shadows, watching, waiting. The mother wolf had already turned, her body rigid with tension, her ears pinned back. A low growl rumbled from her throat. A warning. Ethan's grip on the smallest pup tightened. His instincts screamed at him to get to the truck. Now, but he couldn't move. Not yet. The thing in the trees was too still. Predators didn't hesitate, unless they were waiting for something. "What are you?" The mother wolf took a cautious step forward, her head lowered. Her tail was raised, not in submission, but in defiance. And then, the eyes disappeared. A whisper of movement, a rustling in the underbrush. Whatever had been there was gone. But Ethan wasn't relieved. His gut twisted. No sound of retreating footsteps, no snapping branches, just silence. Too much silence. The mother wolf exhaled sharply, turning back to Ethan. Her message was clear. Go. Now. A desperate escape. Ethan moved quickly. He didn't run. Running triggered pursuit. But every step toward the truck felt like a battle against instincts screaming at him to move faster. The mother wolf walked beside him, her muscles coiled, her head whipping back every few steps. She was still watching the trees. Whatever had been there, she knew it wasn't gone. Ethan reached the truck, yanked open the passenger door, and carefully placed the smallest pup inside. It barely moved, its tiny body trembling. The other 2 pups, just as weak, just as cold. He scooped them up quickly, setting them on the worn leather seat. The mother wolf paced outside the truck, looking back toward the woods, her anxiety bleeding into his own. Then she did something Ethan didn't expect. She jumped up onto the back of the truck bed. Ethan blinked. Wolves didn't do that. They ran, they hid, they fought, but they couldn't trust humans this much. And yet, she had made her choice. Ethan was taking them. All of them. But as soon as he stepped toward the driver's seat, something moved in the trees. A shape shifting between the trunks. Not a wolf. Something bigger. Ethan's stomach clenched. He didn't wait to find out what it was. Slamming the door shut, he threw the truck into gear, tires spinning against the ice as he took off down the road. A presence that won't let go, the truck rattled. As Ethan sped through the empty stretch of road, his eyes flicking between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. The mother wolf crouched in the truck bed, ears alert, body tense. She wasn't relaxing. She wasn't relieved. She was still afraid. Ethan's hands gripped the wheel tighter. What the hell were we looking at back there? He muttered. Of course, there was no answer, only the sound of the wind howling through the trees. And then, the headlights flickered. Just for a second, Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He shook his head. Maybe it was just the cold. Maybe. The truck's engine sputtered. No, 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 not now. He pressed the gas. The engine choked. His stomach plummeted. This isn't happening. He had just filled the tank in town. The battery was fine. The truck was old, sure, but it had never... The headlights flickered again. A chill crept up Ethan's spine, and this time it had nothing to do with the cold. The mother wolf let out a deep, warning growl. Ethan swallowed hard. He wasn't crazy. Something was following them. The cabin looms. Ahead, the road curved, and through the windshield Ethan saw the dark silhouette of his cabin, his only sanctuary in this frozen wilderness. He gritted his teeth. Almost there. Just a little farther. The engine stuttered again, but Ethan didn't ease up on the gas. The mother wolf stayed locked in place, her golden eyes staring at something just beyond the truck. Ethan didn't dare look. He just kept driving. By the time he pulled into the snow-covered driveway, he was already throwing the door open, rushing to get to the pups. The mother wolf leapt from the truck bed before he even reached her, and she did something that sent ice through his veins. She ran toward the cabin first, not toward the trees, not back into the wild. She ran to the door, waiting, like she knew something was coming. Ethan's breath hitched. This wasn't just about saving her pups. This wasn't just about hunger or exhaustion. She was running from something, and now it was coming for both of them. The cabin wasn't safe. Ethan had always thought of his cabin as a fortress, a place where the outside world couldn't reach him. But now, as he watched the mother wolf rush toward the door, not away, not back into the wild, but toward him, he realized something, chilling. She wasn't just seeking shelter, she was running from something. And that meant something was coming. Ethan grabbed the last pup from the truck and slammed the door shut behind him. His breath plumed in the freezing air, his heartbeat like a hammer in his chest. The mother wolf whipped around, staring into the darkness behind him. Her hackles bristled, her ears pinned back, and a deep snarl curled from her throat. Ethan turned slowly, dread creeping up his spine. The tree line loomed in the distance, dark, silent, motionless, but something was there. Something was watching. Air felt wrong, like the pressure had changed, like the world had gone too quiet. And then, movement, a tall, shifting shadow between the trees. Ethan's stomach clenched. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a wolf. It was something else, something that moved too fluidly, too deliberately. The mother wolf let out a piercing howl, her body tensed, ready to fight. Ethan didn't wait. He bolted for the cabin. Inside the cabin. No time to think. The door slammed shut behind him, the old wood shuddering from the force. The pups were shivering, their tiny bodies curled into a pile near the fireplace. The mother wolf stood in the center of the room, her golden eyes fixed on the door. She was listening. Ethan's chest heaved as he grabbed his hunting rifle from the rack. He hadn't fired it in months, not since he gave up hunting, but tonight he might have to. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, a sound. Faint, distant, a low, guttural noise like something too large breathing too close. Ethan's grip on the rifle tightened. "What the hell is out there?" he whispered. The mother wolf turned her head sharply toward the window. And then, a handprint appeared on the glass. Not a paw, a hand. Smudged, unnatural, long-fingered. Ethan staggered back, his breath catching in his throat. The mother wolf let out a vicious snarl, stepping in front of the pups. The handprint faded. Ethan grabbed a chair and jammed it under the doorknob. He locked the windows. The cabin suddenly felt too small, too fragile. For years, he had lived alone out here, believing the biggest threats were bears, the cold, and his own demons. Now, something far worse had found him, and it wasn't leaving. A visitor in the night. The wind howled outside, rattling the wooden walls. Ethan stood near the fireplace, gun in hand, his eyes flicking between the door and the windows. The mother wolf hadn't relaxed. She was pacing now, ears twitching, listening to something only she could hear. Ethan's skin crawled. Then, a noise, a slow, deliberate knock on the door. Ethan stopped breathing. The mother wolf froze. Another knock. Louder. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry as dust. Then, a voice. Low, almost human. Let them out. Ethan's blood turned to ice, the eye. Mother wolf's growl deepened. "They're not yours to keep." The voice came from right outside the door. Ethan raised the rifle. His finger trembled against the trigger. His mind screamed at him to run. But run where? The final choice. Fight or flee. A creaking sound made Ethan whip his head toward the window. The shadowy figure was there. Tall, watching, waiting. The mother wolf stepped closer to him, her breath steady, her golden eyes locked on the door. Ethan took a slow, shaky breath. What do I do? He had two choices. Stay inside, barricade the doors, wait for sunrise. But whatever was outside, it wasn't afraid of doors. Run, get in the truck, drive away. But where would they go? And what if the truck failed again? And the worst thought of all, what if it wasn't just one of them? Ethan sat against the wooden wall of the cabin, the rifle resting across his lap, his mind racing. The fire crackled, filling the space with an orange glow, but the warmth barely reached his skin. His focus was on the mother wolf, still curled near the pups, her golden eyes flickering in the dim light. She was too close. A wild animal, inches from him, trusting him in a way wolves never did. She had no reason to. And yet, she had chosen to. Ethan exhaled slowly, releasing a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the old wooden cabin. But that wasn't what made his skin crawl. It was the silence. That thing, whatever had been, watching, knocking, whispering, had gone quiet. Too quiet. He hated it. He turned his gaze back to the wolves. The smallest pup let out a tiny whimper in its sleep, its frail body twitching against the blanket Ethan had laid beneath them. It wasn't just cold. It was weak, dying if he didn't do something. Ethan clenched his jaw. He had to keep it alive. He stood slowly, careful not to startle the mother wolf. She lifted her head but didn't growl, only watching as he moved toward the small stove in the corner of the room. His supplies were limited. He hadn't planned on caring for 3 wolf pups. He grabbed the small pot he used for boiling water, filling it with what little milk he had left. The mother wolf's ears perked forward as he worked, watching his every movement. "You don't have to trust me," Ethan murmured, setting the pot over the flame. "But if I don't do something, your pup isn't going to make it through the night." The mother wolf didn't react, but she didn't stop him either. Minutes passed, the faint scent of warm milk filling the cabin. Ethan found an old rag, dipping it into the liquid before wringing it out carefully. The pup barely stirred when Ethan lifted it. It felt too light in his hands. Too fragile. He shouldn't be doing this. Interfering. He had told himself he would never get involved again. Yet here he was. Slowly, he pressed the damp cloth to the pup's mouth, letting a few drops of milk seep onto its tongue. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the smallest flicker of movement, a weak swallow. Ethan's chest tightened. He did it again, a little more this time. The pup stirred, its tiny mouth twitching, drinking. A small success. He let out a breath, relief washing over him. The mother wolf shifted, watching with cautious eyes. Ethan met her gaze. "You're not the only one trying to keep them alive." She blinked, then, for the first time, she lowered her head and rested it near his knee. Not in submission. Not in fear. Just trust. Ethan didn't move. He barely breathed. For the first time in a long time, he felt something crack in his chest. Something he had buried beneath years of guilt and isolation. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. The fear that lingers hours past. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows against the log walls. The mother wolf remained close to her pups, but she didn't keep her distance from Ethan anymore. She had made her choice, and, in a way, so had he. But that didn't mean he wasn't still afraid. Ethan's fingers tightened around the rifle as he listened to the night outside. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. But the unease hadn't left. Whatever had been out there, it hadn't given up, and he knew it would be back. He didn't know if the wolves would survive the night, but one thing was certain. He would fight to make sure they did. The fire had burned low, casting only faint orange light across the small cabin. The storm outside had picked up, the wind howling through the trees like a chorus of voices calling out in the night. But Ethan knew it wasn't the storm he should be afraid of. He sat near the fire, his rifle resting against the wall within arm's reach. The mother wolf lay curled around her pups, her golden eyes half-lidded, but Ethan could tell she wasn't truly asleep. She was waiting. Listening. Just like him. Because something was still out there. The night had been too quiet for too long. Then, just as the wind lulled for a moment, a sound. Ethan's breath hitched, a faint scraping noise coming from just outside the cabin. Not the wind, not an animal, something deliberate. The mother wolf's ears flicked up, her body tensing in an instant. Ethan reached for the rifle without thinking, gripping it tight as he turned toward the door. The scraping stopped. Then, 3 slow knocks. Ethan's stomach twisted. He hadn't imagined it. The mother wolf snarled, stepping protectively in front of the pups. Then, a voice. Low. Almost human. Let them out. Ethan went ice cold. It was the same voice from before, the one that had spoken just outside his truck, the one that shouldn't exist. He rose to his feet, gripping the rifle tight. "Who's there?" he called, his voice steady but his pulse hammering in his ears. Silence. Then, the doorknob twisted. Ethan fired. The gunshot exploded through the cabin, the sound reverberating off the walls. The mother wolf flinched but didn't run. The door held firm. It hadn't been forced open. Ethan's breathing came fast, his body rigid. Had he scared it away? Had it ever really been there at all? The mother wolf let out a deep, warning growl, her gaze locked onto the door. She still sensed it, and that meant It was still out there. Ethan took a slow step back, his mind racing. He couldn't stay here. If whatever was outside wanted to get in badly enough, this cabin wouldn't stop it. He turned his gaze toward the back door. They had to run. Now. He didn't know where, but staying here meant waiting to die. Ethan knelt, reaching for the pups, bundling them carefully in his coat. The mother wolf hesitated for only a moment before following as he moved toward the back door. He grabbed his keys from the table, barely breathing as he reached for the handle. Then, the front door creaked. And this time, it wasn't the wind. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The front door creaked again, shifting slightly in its frame as if something, or someone, was pressing against it from the outside. The mother wolf stood tense, her lips pulled back in a silent snarl. Her golden eyes flickered between the door, and Ethan, as if she too was weighing their next move. He clutched the rifle tighter, his finger hovering over the trigger. "We need to go. Now." The pups squirmed weakly inside his coat, their fragile bodies barely holding on. If they waited any longer, they wouldn't survive the night, even if the thing outside didn't get them first. Ethan took a slow step backward, his eyes locked on the door. The mother wolf followed. She wasn't running ahead. She wasn't abandoning. Her young. She was staying close to him. She trusted him to lead. A sharp crack splintered through the cabin. Not from the door, from the window. Ethan's stomach clenched as he saw it, a long, pale hand pressed against the glass. Fingers too long, skin stretched too tight, and then it moved, a slow, deliberate tap. Once, twice, 3 times. Let them out. The whisper crawled through the walls, slipping through the cracks in the cabin like smoke. The mother wolf let out a deep, guttural growl. Ethan didn't wait. He lunged for the back door, throwing it open as the cold night air rushed in. The snow-covered ground stretched ahead, leading to the darkened tree line beyond. No time to hesitate. He bolted. The mother wolf was at his side, keeping pace as they crashed through the snow, the pups bundled tightly against his chest. Behind them. The cabin door slammed open. Ethan didn't dare look back. He knew whatever was there was finally stepping inside. The truck. That was their only chance. The headlights were faintly visible ahead, the old vehicle partially buried in the snow. Ethan pushed forward, his breath ragged, his legs burning as the weight of the pups slowed him down. Then, a sound from behind. Heavy, unnatural thudding, like something massive moving on all fours, chasing them down. The mother wolf whipped around, skidding to a stop. Ethan nearly tripped as he turned, his stomach dropping. A shadow loomed just beyond the cabin, moving toward them at an impossible speed. Not a bear. Not a man. Something in between. The mother wolf lunged forward. No. Ethan reached out, grabbing her fur, pulling her back. "No! We run!" She fought against him for only a second before relenting, turning with him as they tore toward the truck. Ethan fumbled for his keys, nearly dropping them as he yanked the door open and threw himself inside. The mother wolf leapt into the back, her breath coming in sharp pants. The thing was almost on them. Ethan jammed the key into the ignition, praying. Please, please, please. The engine roared to life. Ethan didn't hesitate. He slammed his foot against the gas, the truck lurching forward as the tires skidded over the ice. And then, something hit the back. The entire vehicle shuddered. Ethan gritted his teeth, forcing the truck forward, his knuckles white against the wheel. Through the rearview mirror, he saw it. A twisted shape, hunched over in the snow, watching them with glowing yellow eyes. Not wolf. Not human. Something else. And then, it smiled. Ethan's stomach turned. The mother wolf let out a long, mournful howl as they disappeared down the road, leaving the thing behind in the darkness. But Ethan knew. It wasn't over. Ethan's hands shook against the steering wheel, his breath coming in ragged gasps as the truck sped down the icy road. His knuckles were white, his grip so tight it felt like he might break the wheel in half. The mother wolf sat in the truck bed, her golden eyes still fixed on the road behind them. She hadn't relaxed, neither had Ethan, because he knew it wasn't over. That thing, whatever it was, had let them go too easily, and its smile. Ethan clenched his jaw. Don't think about it. Just keep driving. The pups whimpered inside his coat, their tiny bodies still weak but warm now. They were alive. For now. He glanced at the fuel gauge. Half a tank. Enough to get them far from here. But where would they go? He had spent years isolating himself from the world, convincing himself he didn't need anyone. Now, with a mother wolf and 3 pups relying on him, he wasn't sure if he had ever truly believed that. The mother wolf let out a low whine. Ethan followed her gaze into the side mirror. The road behind them was empty. No shadows, no movement, but that didn't mean they were safe. He had a decision to make. The choice: a new beginning or running forever. Ethan exhaled sharply and tightened his grip on the wheel. If he kept driving, if he left everything behind, maybe, just maybe, he could outrun whatever had been stalking them. But the mother wolf had already risked everything to come to him, and Ethan knew running forever wasn't an option. He glanced at the pups again, their tiny bodies curled together inside his coat. They wouldn't survive much longer without proper care, and he couldn't do this alone. His cabin had been his prison for too long. Maybe it was time to find something more. A place where they could be safe. Maybe not from the thing that lurked in the woods, but from the ghosts that had been chasing him for years. He took a deep breath and turned onto the main road, heading toward the one place he had avoided for years. The closest wildlife sanctuary. For the first time in a long time, Ethan wasn't running from something. He was running toward something. Final scene. A glimmer of hope. The first streaks of morning light broke over the horizon as the truck rumbled down the road. The mother wolf finally turned away from the window. For the first time since he met her, she closed her eyes, and Ethan knew. For now, at least, they had made it. The road stretched ahead, bathed in the soft glow of dawn. Ethan hadn't seen the sun rise in a long time. Not really. He had spent too many mornings buried in the shadows of his own regrets, too many nights trying to forget what had been lost. But today was different. Today, he wasn't alone. The mother wolf stirred in the truck bed, her ears flicking as she shifted her position. The pups remained curled inside his coat, their tiny bodies rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. Alive. Safe. Ethan exhaled, gripping the wheel a little tighter. He wasn't sure what waited for them at the sanctuary, wasn't even sure they would be welcomed there, but it was a chance, and for the first time in years, he was willing to take one. He reached over, carefully adjusting the coat around the pups. The smallest one, the one that had nearly slipped away in the snow, let out a soft, contented sigh. A flicker of something warmed Ethan's chest. Hope. The mother wolf lifted her head, turning toward him. Their eyes met for a brief moment. She didn't need to speak. He already knew. Thank you. Ethan swallowed hard, nodding slightly before turning his focus back to the road. Maybe this was how it was always meant to be. Not isolation, not regret. Just a man, a mother wolf, and 3 fragile lives fighting for a second chance. As the truck rumbled toward the horizon, Ethan finally allowed himself to believe. Maybe this time, he had saved something worth saving. Have you ever witnessed an unbreakable bond between a human and an animal? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. What would you have done if you were in Ethan's place? Let us know below.